Now we are ready to bring in another journeyman. We've got a journeyman party going on here, very similar to when we had Brooks Bollinger. Gus Frerotte now joining the show. What's going on, Gus? How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing great, man. I know Sage is extremely excited. He texted me that he has all sorts of questions, but I have to ask you, Gus, was Sage Rosenfels a good teammate?
He was. Sage was great because if you didn't know the answer, Sage always knew it.
As he just proved
Whether it
on the
was right or
radio.
wrong, Sage knew
Oh,
it.
that's a good addition.
Well, Gus, it's great to hear. I was saying to Matt that you and I could probably talk for hours on end, and it's great to have you on the show. And I'm going back, of course, looking at your long career, and we talk about journeyman quarterbacks on this show all the time. We actually do a segment on Wednesdays of which we bring up one of the many journeyman quarterbacks from the opposing team that the Vikings are about to play, and then Coller and I each sort of do a deep dive or a Wikipedia style / stat style deep dive into their careers, and your name obviously comes up. A guy who bounced around. Like, we have certain criteria. Usually it's 4 or more teams that you're on, and then there's like bonus points for second stint, which you have.
Yep.
A second stint, but all the stories that come with it, with different franchises, different owners, coaches, all the players, players you like, players you didn't like, and I'm sure you've got a million stories and we have a lot of overlap, of course. Playing in Miami together under Nick Saban, under Jason Garrett as our quarterbacks coach, and Scott Linehan as our coordinator. We had Ricky Williams on that team, and I'm sure we could talk about all sorts of things. So, how is post journeyman quarterback life treating you?
Well, it's interesting because I did coach for a while. I coached high school and then tried to go into the pros, and there was no coach that really wanted a 46-year-old ex-quarterback who played for 15 years to come in and just sit there and not say anything. They knew that if I came in there, I was going to speak my mind and speak my piece, and that probably was one of the reasons I played for 7 teams, because if you know it and you see it, you got to say it, and I was always like that, but the transition has been great. Now I'm kind of finding more of my lane. I've started a new podcast called Huddle Up with Gus, where I've been doing some incredible interviews. I just interviewed Mike Silver, which is only supposed to be like a 45-minute podcast, but it went like an hour and a half. So, Silver very well, Sage, and he was a great interview. So I do a lot of that now, and it's been a lot of fun, and just trying to, keep building my brand a little bit. But the transition has been tough. Everybody goes through that, and it's been an interesting road since I left the NFL.
And you are currently living in St. Louis, is that correct?
No, I live in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh.
My daughter graduated from St. Louis High School with Ezekiel and Foye, and who Ezekiel plays for the Cowboys, and Foye Lucan plays for the Falcons. And so when they all graduated and I was coaching there, I said, well, it's probably a good time to leave, because I'm not really going to have anybody else coming through this high school in a bit. And they have had a few, but my daughter went back to Philadelphia to school, and so we moved back to Pittsburgh, my wife and I, and we've been here ever since. And so everybody's in college, and we've been empty nesters and kind of enjoying that side of it.
Well, now you have a chance to look back and you see some of the coaching that you had over the course of your career. One of your stops was in Denver in 2000, 2001. You had a chance to be a part of that, Gary Kubiak, Mike Shanahan, Alex Gibbs system early on, that zone scheme, that bootleg scheme. The Vikings obviously have Kubiak as a consultant, sort of, maybe sort of an assistant coordinator to a young Kevin Stefanski as one of the coaches. They're running that system. Kirk Cousins has really gotten hot in the last 3 weeks. What are your memories of that zone scheme, the play action bootleg stuff? What are your best memories of that?
Well, your play action and all that you guys have been talking about with Kirk, it's not going to work unless you got a great line and a good running back. And when we were in Denver with Alex Gibbs there coaching that line, and it didn't matter who we plugged in there at running back, they were going to be good. And, from Mike Anderson to Terrell Davis to Orlando Gary, everybody in Denver seemed to, really make it. And, that line just did such an outstanding job the way that Coach Gibbs coached it. Now in Minnesota, you have a lot of that Denver carryover with Coobs and Perriani and what's the line coach's name? I can't remember.
Rick Dennison.
Rick Dennison, right? And they understand that, and I think you're seeing that with the explosion of your running back Delvin up there, and what Kirk is doing with the play action and tight ends. I mean, the tight ends to me were always the key for that offense. Whether they were blocking or getting out downfield or creating. I mean, you think about some of the great tight ends that came out of Denver, and it just, the tight ends were always the key, because if you didn't have one that couldn't block, then your run game wasn't going to be good. If you didn't have one that, couldn't go out and run those corner routes and some of those posts and really be wise in the pass game, then you weren't going to have success. And so I think you got a great mix in Minnesota right now with all of that. And I think it was really smart of them to bring in Kubiak and Perriani to really get to the nuts and bolts of why that offense is successful.
And Irv Smith has played a big role as a second-round tight end. It's not an easy thing to do, to step right in and play a significant role where you have to block and go down the field as well. But he's done that and kind of been, I think, a linchpin to what makes it work. We're talking with Gus Frerotte here, Matthew Coller, Sage Rosenfels. So tell me, Gus, we've been talking a lot about how the Vikings have played some pretty easy defenses that were not super special in these last couple of weeks, and that's playing into Kirk Cousins' success. So what is it that defenses can do to slow down or make more difficult a Kubiak offense? Like, are defenses going to start figuring this out as we go down the road here?
Well, I don't know if it's necessary. I think the personnel is the same. You have some stars throughout defenses throughout the league, but I think it's the coordinators. The coordinator's job is to figure out how to stop an offense. And, it's just so amazing to watch Belichick every week figuring out how to stop an offense that he's playing against. And, these defenses are going to have to figure out which one they want to try and beat. Do they want to try and stop the run and let Kirk Cousins beat him, or are they going to try and, hey, we're going to play zone and let the running back go? And I think that most teams want to stop the run if you really look at it, because if your line starts moving the ball and starts pounding on that defensive line and those linebackers, it's going to be a long, long day. And then you're bringing safeties down, and then, like you said, all the play action stuff opens up. But I think that any team can win on any Sunday, and I think it's up to you got a lot of great players in the NFL, and people want to say, well, we don't have the talent that this team has. Well, yeah, that could be true in certain parts of a defense, but for the most part, you have the same talent, and it's up to those coaches to really bring the best out of your defense. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Vikings, because as you get deeper in the schedule and the people they play and going against Green Bay, I mean, I think Green Bay is going to be the big test for them.
Sage, you still over there, buddy?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you fell asleep at the wheel.
No, I did not. So
did he pay attention in meetings like this, Gus?
Yeah, well, hey, I didn't know if you were going to go, Collar. So my question is this: do you remember certain styles of defenses? When the Vikings, like in this past game against Detroit, they got a little bit lucky. One of their D linemen went out in that ball game, and the Vikings really started heating up there. Seemed like in the second half. And do you think that to me, lines that had big, really, really, really big guys, but then on third down could rush the passer, gave this style of offense trouble, because they could stop the run and then get in third and longer situations and have the pass rushers that. I think that's always been the concern about this style of offense, is the line a lot of times a little bit smaller, more athletic, which allows them to run that outside zone. But can they hold up for 20, 25 passes a game in straight drop back? Did you have some of those same thoughts when you played in this offense?
Well, one of my favorite things to do was be friends with the linemen, because the linemen were kind of my kind of guys. How I grew up, they're all just salt of the earth people. And Tommy Nalen, I'll never forget when he would tell me, we're playing against whether it was Seattle or we went and played the Ravens in the playoffs, and he'd always get a fever blister, and he called it Sam Adams, because he says, I would hate playing against Sam Adams because he's big, he's fast, he's strong, and if he's just fast, I can play against him. If he's just big and he's not fast, then I know what to do, but he's all three. And so I think really to stop that style of offense where you got a great run game, you got a great pass game, and you got weapons out there, then you got to have guys in the middle that just can hold up, play the run, and where you're not putting 5 and 6 guys committed to the run every time. You're playing a normal defense. DBs can sit back and sit on routes because you have pass rushers that can get to the quarterback in those long down and distances. And so if you have a great mix, I think that's how you stop an offense like that, is what you said, Sage. You got to have big guys in the middle who are strong and fast, and then you got to have pass rushers that can come in and wreak havoc on a quarterback and make him move in the pocket and make him check down all the time. Because when we played those good teams that had those types of guys, those DBs just sat on every route, and you didn't have time to wait for him to get 50 yards downfield, and you were end up throwing, behind the chains all the time. You're never getting those plus 15, those plus 20 throws.
Talking with Gus Frerotte here on Purple Daily. Gus, I'm curious, I don't know how many Vikings games you've gotten to see, but it always amazes me that Mike Zimmer, year to year, we go into training camp and we all write these stories. Well, we're a little worried about the depth at this position, or maybe this guy's going to fall off. And then year after year, they have great defenses. Usually teams, they have their defenses kind of go up and down, and maybe it depends on luck, or maybe it depends on schedule or something like that. But Zimmer has been so consistent through his career. Why do you think that is?
Because he's a great defensive coach, and he understands schemes, and he understands talent, and he understands who needs to be where. I mean, be where they are on the field, and he's not going to put somebody out of position. I mean, you've seen Bill Belichick throw receivers in playing in slot positions, covering their slot receivers on the other side, because he knew that that's what I needed at that point. And it seems like Zimmer really understands that philosophy, and it doesn't hurt to have good players like he has, like the Vikings have right now. But when you have a coach that understands little things, little schemes, and can watch enough film and break down tendencies, that if a tight end is up on the ball, if he's off, there's different tendencies. And I think one of the things that Zimmer really understands is having smart players, is that when you watch film, you understand it, and that knowledge of watching that film carries over onto the field, so that you're just not playing with your pure talent. Now you're playing with your talent and your smarts.
Well, and speaking of smart coaches, can we talk about Mike Shanahan for a second? Because I do find it interesting. Here's a coach you played for in Denver. Gary Kubiak was the coordinator, and we're sort of coming full circle. Did you see, anything in particular about that style of offense that may have been different than the other offenses and offensive coordinators you played in the NFL that has somehow spurned from Kubiak to Kyle Shanahan and now Sean McVay and Matt LaFleur, this coaching tree that's having a ton of success currently in the NFL? Was there anything specifically different about the way Shanahan went about things? Was it details? Was it just scheme? Was it, how he saw players? What may have made him different?
Well, I think Coach Shanahan was different because obviously he had a scheme. He stuck to it. I didn't necessarily fit into that scheme great when I went there. I was more of I came from the digit system, big play action. That West Coast was a little different for me. It was harder to catch on. But Coach Shanahan kind of figured it out with me that when I got in and I had to play, when Brian Griese, when we shared time or whatever it was, that, some of my strengths were big play action, throwing comebacks, throwing digs, throwing corner routes, those types of things. And then, but in that system, you're really trying to find the weakness of the defense. And the hardest part for me was the language. I think that all the stuff is the same, but in Coach Shanahan's system, and I don't know if it's still the same way with Cal running it or Coobs running it, but, sometimes, Sage, this, there's 16, 17 words you got to say in the huddle. And to me, it was absolutely insane. I got to tell everybody what to do.
Yeah.
Mike was a genius for that. And then he just put people around him who believed in him, believed in his system, and then try to keep those players and attract those players that play really well in that type of system. And I think Kirk Cousins fits that kind of system perfectly.
Well, and I know there were some differences. When you were playing for Shanahan, just the same play was, double right, fake 18, reach, quarterback keep left, whatever. And ours is just double right, fake 18, keep left. We simplified so many things. And fake 18 handoff, quarterback keep left, I think is what they called it. And we just had fake 18, keep left. So we definitely trimmed off some of the fat of that wording. But yet there were still some massively long play calls.
Oh yeah, and it's tough, when they're trying to figure out what play to call, and you're standing in the huddle and you're going, okay, we got 15 seconds left. Let's see if we can get this out, and then get up and be able to read the defense and do all that. But it's amazing what your mind can do. I had to work extremely hard coming from a digit system and then going to the West Coast to learn all that stuff with Coobs grinding on me and Pat grinding on me and all the people there of saying, you got to remember these plays because you want to get to the point where you're Steve Young. And I'm like, look, I'm never going to be Steve Young. You're not going to tell me one word or one formation and I'm going to remember the whole play, because that's really how the West Coast is designed. That the formation we have this week, we have one play off of it. And it's insane to me that Steve was, had that kind of memory and could do that kind of thing. But for me, I needed a wristband to really remember some of those plays.
Gus, before we let you go, each week, as Sage mentioned, we have our journeyman quarterback of the week. So I feel like you should have a nomination here. Why don't you give us another journeyman that you played with in Washington? You've got some good options here, including Sage if you want him. And then tell us a little story about that other journeyman. I was just looking this up. You've got some gems here. You got Jeff Hostetler that was on the same team with you. I mean, there's all sorts of guys. So give us our journardman quarterback of the week.
I had Jeff Hostetler, Casey Weldon, a bunch of guys that I played with, and one story about Jeff. Jeff was a guy that I looked up to when he came in. I don't think he had the juice in his arm left anymore, but he was a hard worker, good player, and I really just sat there and asked him questions every day about what it was like playing with the Raiders and the Giants, going to the Super Bowl, and doing a lot of those things. And one thing that Jeff and I really had in common was we both loved to be pranksters. He was a prankster in the locker room. I love to prank people. I've pranked a lot of guys in my time. I just did a podcast with Morton Anderson talking about how, I froze all his clothes up in Minnesota when he came and kicked for the Vikings back in the day. And then the next thing I know, all my clothes were out of my locker room and over the goalpost, frozen over the goalpost before practice. And I had nothing to wear. And D. Ryan had to get me some clothes that didn't necessarily fit for practice. But Jeff told me a story about how he pranked Howie Long. And he said, what I did was I got a license plate made up in California. It said, honk if you're gay. And he put it on Howie's car. And he said he followed Howie home, but Howie didn't know it. And all these people are honking at Howie down the road, and Howie's just waving out the window. And so, that was one of my favorite stories of how to prank somebody. There's a lot more that I can go into, but that's just the thing about the NFL is that you got a brotherhood, you got a lot of people, and it's just amazing, some of the things that you go through with these people because you're there every day. And to really to be all business every day, it's hard to do because now the NFL is definitely all year long. And so you got to have some fun and you got to bring some levity into the locker room and create relationships sometimes where there may not be.